You know, something had been bugging me about this whole economic crisis. Not the crisis as a whole, because that should bother everybody, but the criticisms as to who's to blame, and the Republicans blaming the Democrats for it happening, and something just didn't seem quite right. But I never saw any real newscast talk about it in any way that settled what I was feeling. I think I figured out what it is.
Many financial analysts are saying that if mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had been effectively regulated years ago, the supercharged subprime mortgage meltdown that led to the current financial mess would either never have happened or would have been nowhere near as severe.
Okay, so here we have Fox News basically saying that this is a crisis that could have been averted. It could have been averted years ago. So, alright, that's what we've been hearing so far. Let's see who's blaming whom.
Chief White House correspondent Brett Baer rejoins us now to examine the timeline. What were those warning signs? Who raised them? And who disputed them?
The Bush administration raised red flags starting in April 2001.
April 2001. So if you look at the makeup of government, you had a Republican president, you had a 50-50 split in the Senate with a Republican vice president to break the tie, and you had a Republican majority in the House. That's the makeup of the government as it was. So if the president warned of problems with the economy and with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac then, shouldn't he have been able to have that passed?
In 2003, the White House warning about Fannie and Freddie was upgraded to a systemic risk that could spread beyond just the housing sector. In fall of 2003, the Bush administration was pushing Congress hard to create a new federal agency to regulate and supervise Fannie and Freddie.
Okay, so now you're in 2003. The Republicans still had control of the Senate, now with 51 votes. The Republicans have control of the House, and the Republicans have control of the presidency. Again, they should have no problems getting anything passed. Fox News did go on to blame Barney Frank, who is a ranking member of the committee, and they blamed him for claiming that Freddie and Fannie were okay and obstructing anything, but in reality, the Republicans controlled the House. It didn't matter what the Democrats did. The Democrats couldn't stop it. They should have passed the House. But it didn't. So, again, the question you have to ask yourself is, why?
Senator John McCain co-sponsored legislation pushing for regulation.
So now we're to the bill that McCain keeps talking about, the one in 2005 that he co-sponsored. 2005, Republicans had control of the House. Republicans had control of the Senate. Republicans had control of the presidency. Republicans had control of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, where this would start. So, again, why exactly would this not pass?
Made it out of the Senate Banking Committee with a party line vote. All of the Democrats voted against it, but fearing that they didn't have the votes to pass it, Republicans didn't even bring it up on the Senate floor.
Oh, I see. The Republicans didn't want to risk losing a vote, and that's why they were opposed to putting legislation on the floor of the Senate that they felt was needed for this economic security of our country, because they were afraid that they wouldn't get the votes. What happened to the Gang of 14? I believe that in that Congress we had some conservative Democrats and some more moderate Republicans get together and say, hey, we're going to stop judicial filibusters. Why didn't they approach the Gang of 14 and approach these more conservative-leaning Democrats and say, this is really needed. Why don't you help us out? But no, they were afraid of the result of a vote. And that's why they didn't pass this needed legislation. So now we see one of the reasons why the Republicans did not pass this legislation, even though they controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's because they were afraid to lose a political battle. Talk about hypocrisy. But yet, there's one more reason.
Freddie and Fannie used huge lobbying budgets and political contributions to keep regulators off their backs. A group called the Center for Responsive Politics keeps track of which politicians
get Fannie and Freddie political contributions. The top 3 U.S. senators getting big Fannie and Freddie political bucks were Democrats, and number 2 is Senator Barack Obama. Now remember, he's only been in the Senate 4 years, but still managed to grab the number 2 spot ahead of John Kerry, decades in the Senate, and Chris Dodd, who's chairman of the Senate Banking Committee.
All right, so it comes down to money. And if you would only listen to Fox News, they would have you believe that it's the Democrats' fault because the Democrats get all the money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, obviously because they're the top 3 people. Of course, they have to leave out the 4th person because that 4th person is Senator Bennett, who was a Republican who got $107,999 from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac contributions. You have Republican Spencer Baucus getting $103,000. You have Republican Roy Blunt getting $96,950. You have Republican Bond getting $95,400. You have Republican Richard Shelby getting $80,000. You have Republican Tom Davis getting $75,499. You have Republican John Boehner getting $67,750. You have Republican Tom Reynolds getting $62,200. You have Republican Deborah Price getting $55,500. And yes, you have Republican John McCain, who got $21,550 from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So there you have it. They are Republicans who also get money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And perhaps those Republicans who got more money than, the $20,000 that McCain got, perhaps those Republicans are also at fault for not pushing through legislation, who were too afraid to have anything pass, or perhaps they were just really afraid of having their cash cows taken away from them so that when they run for election the next time, they won't have as much financial support. So yes, again, it's hypocrisy on the part of the Republican Party, who are trying to put themselves on a high moral pedestal when it comes to this economic disaster, and trying to say that they're the ones who tried to do something, but they controlled the House and the Senate for the majority of the years between 2001 and 2007, when the Democrats took the majority in the House and the Senate. They had plenty of times to pass this legislation. When they had 55 senators, they could have worked with the Gang of 14 to prevent any filibustering from taking place. But they were afraid to, quote, lose a vote, but in reality the Republicans were afraid to lose their cash cow. And that, my friends, is the reason why you did not see any meaningful legislation take place over those years that the Republicans were in control of government. It's not because of Democratic blocking the votes. It's not because of individual Democrats who were afraid of losing their cash cows from these campaign contributors. It's because the Republicans who were afraid of losing their cash cow, who failed to take advantage of their majority in the House and the Senate in order to pass this legislation that was needed. So the Republicans who are blaming everybody else need to look at themselves in the mirror first to see who's to blame for not getting meaningful legislation passed that would have placed regulations on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Period.